Ladies and gentlemen, the 2024 recession has begun.
But our base case is that the U.S. economy will go into recession by the middle of next year.
Powell's Fed raised interest rates 11 times to cool the economy.
But this is not the first time the world will succumb to recession. It started when we invented paper money, also known as fiat currency. That, combined with the most dangerous human trait, greed, brought us here.
The money was just flowing out of Wall Street for Bacchanalia. Good evening. This is the trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange, the nerve center of American capitalism.
It all began when we started speculating on future prices of commodities, the key word being future. And we took it a step further by inventing an entire market based off of this speculation.
The biggest engine for wealth creation in the world, the driver of wealth, is the stock market.
So people began taking debt to fund their speculations, leading us to where we are now, an economy fueled by debt.
The world is drowning in a record amount of debt.
From the shirt you wear to the burger and coffee you took in the morning, all of it is debt, on top of more debt and more debt. And now the chicken has come home to roost.
I'm so curious. He says early 2024. What do you think? Is the cash going to run out? Are we going to get into a recession?
The US economy is now throwing the last kicks of a dying horse, with the Fed raising interest rates 11 times in 2 years.
When you look at the world gaps, it's difficult to be optimistic on that.
The only question that remains is when will the bubble burst? And that, my friend, is why you're here. The tulip mania. To better understand the 2024 recession, let's go back in time to the 1700s. You see this right here? This one stalk of tulips could get you a house in the Netherlands if you want it. How? Let me take you through a short story. This is Lionel. Lionel is a staunch Calvinist. They follow the Christian practice of John Calvin. They are not allowed to flaunt their wealth, so no gold, silver necklaces, amazing woolly coats, or even nice castles. Tulips are not expensive, but they're still out of reach for most poor people. So how about a tulip to differentiate himself from the peasants? It doesn't break any religious rules. But then his rich neighbors notice that people give him a bit more respect in the market because of his dangling tulips. So naturally, if you can afford a tulip, you'll go get one to get some more respect. But there is a problem. Tulips are seasonal. They grow during spring only. And with the demand soaring, their prices are getting out of hand. So to protect himself, Lionel decides to buy his tulips in advance from the local farmers. So they write a contract with the farmer that Lionel will come for the tulips next year at today's prices. Lionel pays and he goes his way. But two stockbrokers have identified an opportunity. They come to Lionel and tell him that they want to buy that contract at a higher price. Of course, Lionel sells the contract at a higher price and makes a profit. Unbeknownst to him, the brokers will actually make an even greater profit. And so the madness begins. The next broker buys from the next broker at a higher price, and the next broker buys from the next broker at a higher price. They start outbidding each other and soon even start taking debt to outbid each other. At some point, the prices of the tulips go so high that it just doesn't make any sense anymore. Until one person asks the question no one wants to even think about. Why are you buying tulips at 1,000 times their fair price? And then poof, the bubble bursts. No one wants anything to do with tulips anymore. The prices crash. People lose their houses, others lose their animals, worse still, others get killed. All because of a tulip. Now that was called the tulip mania of the Netherlands. And 300 years later, nothing has changed. 1929 Great Depression.
For these fighting men, war was over. But for the kids in short pants who watched them, it would come again.
It started with the Allies winning the First World War. Naturally, these men returning from war needed to be fed. They needed houses. They needed jobs. So the government, wanting to spark economic activity, lowered interest rates to as low as 5% and later to 4%. This meant that loans were cheaper to get. People flocked to banks and everyone got their chunk. But this is where it gets interesting. Majority of the money didn't go into production. It went to the stock market, the New York Stock Exchange. So everyone began speculating on the future prices of shares, and the share prices kept going through the roof, until someone decided to ask the hard question. Why are you buying shares at 1,000 times their fair value? And there was only one word in the NYSE building the morning on October 24th, 1929. And it all came crashing down. 30% of the USA GDP was wiped out, 1 in every 4 adults was jobless, people died of starvation, houses were worth nothing and banks went into bankruptcy. But we didn't learn, did we? 1980 recession.
You, Richard Milhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Richard Milhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear
that you will faithfully execute the office.
That I will faithfully execute the office.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amount.
The next recession that caught America off guard was the 1980 recession. Immediately after Nixon's announcement, inflation rose from 4.7% to 12.3% that year, because all the money that was being held back by gold speculators flooded the economy to buy other assets, now that gold was not the reserve currency. Prices simply skyrocketed and things got out of hand. And then the government was like, wait a minute, why are we paying for things 1,000 times than their fair price? They began raising interest rates, which shot up to 11% in 1974 from lows of 5%. These sudden changes were part of a stop-go monetary policy. They weren't sustained enough to either end inflation or spur growth. Confused businesses kept prices high to stay ahead of the Fed's interest rate spikes, and this only made inflation worse. By 1980, the Fed's interest rate was a staggering 20%, and the country slipped into a recession officially. High interest rates means loans are expensive, people stop buying unnecessary goods to save money, companies begin making losses, their stock prices fall, massive layoffs, budget cuts, literally zero investments, and we're back to square one. You would think we would learn a lesson or two, but boy, oh boy. The dot-com bubble.
Long term, I believe that it's very easy to predict that there are going to be lots of successful companies born of the internet.
Who says online users are a bunch of anti-social geeks? Look, here we are in this nice cafe, drink in hand, friendly people, and we're surfing the net.
The 90s were the best time for tech junkies. Leave alone the AI revolution of 2024. 90s kids had it all. Nokia, Sony PlayStation, Nintendo 64, Tiki Me Elmo, the DVDs, name it all. All of a sudden, the nerds became billionaires. And the kids who used to bully them back to work at their companies. But as usual, greed took the better part of us. Now, imagine any company name in your head right now. Have you? Now add the words .com in the end. Voila, you have a company. Or at least you would have one if this was the 90s. Why? Because there was cheap money and the internet was the new thing. The Fed brought down the rate from around 8.25% in 1990 down to 3% in 1993. It was euphoric, to say the least. Money was flowing from other industries to the dot-com companies. By March 2000, investments in the Nasdaq Composite Stock Market Index had risen by 800% to 5,500. It reached a price-earnings ratio of 200, dwarfing the peak price-earnings ratio of 80 for the Japanese Nikkei 225 during the Japanese asset price bubble of 1991. Some companies' value rose by 2,000% in a matter of months. Remember the dot-com company you just created in your head? Whatever value you gave it, it would be worth 2,000% next year. This madness went on for 5 years until someone decided to ask the hard question. Why are we buying dot-com companies' shares at 1,000 times their fair price? And poof, it all came crashing down. It's described as nothing short of breathtaking. A points drop never before seen in the US markets. On March 10th, 2000, the dot-com bubble burst. Between March 2000 and October 2002, the Nasdaq fell from 5,048 to 1,139, erasing nearly all of its gains during the dot-com bubble. By the end of 2001, most publicly traded dot-com companies had failed. But the economy picked up pretty well and we all breathed a sigh of relief because that was never going to happen again. Or was it? The 2008 recession.
If you are watching us from the last home you'll ever own tonight, consider yourself lucky.
A lot of headhunters are calling us. So I think there are many possibilities, but there are a lot of people in Lehman fired today.
2008 was a tumultuous year for the economy. The housing market collapse created one financial crisis after another, and it often seemed as if the news could only get worse. Here's a look back at the roller coaster that was our nation's economy in 2008.
I think this is the most significant financial crisis in the post-war period.
There are fears the sell-off will continue on Wall Street.
There are fears that sell-off will continue on Wall Street, soaring gas prices, soaring home prices, and rising unemployment. We never learn, do we? You see, after the dot-com bubble, everyone in Wall Street swore to regulate their risk appetite on intangible assets, that they had learned their lesson and there would be no more careless speculation. They were told to tame their greed. But this is Wall Street. What do you mean to tame their greed? So naturally, they looked for their next prey. And suddenly, the one thing that should be free for every human being on Earth became their playground. Houses. Who doesn't pay their mortgage? No, seriously, who? And if you don't pay your mortgage, you'll lose your house, right? Nothing will happen to you. You'll just go back to renting. Wrong. You see, back in 2001, after the dot-com bubble burst, banks were hit the worst. The Fed lowered its rate to 1.75%, which meant that banks earned very little interest. They didn't have enough money to lend to continue making profits. So guess what? Wall Street meets Main Street. They started something called securitization of mortgage debt. This means bundling mortgages up to diversify the risk, and then selling that bundle to someone else, like Goldman Sachs or the Lehman Brothers. This allows the banks to get more funds to issue out more mortgages, and the cycle continued. It was so bad that at some point, people would take 3, 4 mortgages on their house because the money was there, and the prices kept soaring. Investment banks would then insure these securities with insurance companies in the event someone fails to pay their mortgage. But who doesn't pay their mortgage, surely? It got so bad that these banks didn't even care about your credit score. If you want a house, you can get it. Just sign the damn papers. To put it into perspective, the real estate industry grew from just $1 trillion to over $50 trillion in 2007, until someone decided to ask the question, yet again, why are we buying houses at 1,000 times their fair price? And it all came crashing down. All those mortgage securities became worthless because no one wanted to buy. These investment banks that had excessively invested in the mortgage securities all of a sudden started filing for bankruptcies. Banks recorded some of the largest losses ever recorded. Were it not for the government printing money out of thin air to give them, we'd have none of those banks today. But did we learn? Signs of a recession in 2024.
Japan unexpectedly slipped into recession at the end of last year.
Britain's economy fell into a recession in the second half of last year.
Now, China was expected to experience a rip-roaring recovery after it lifted strict COVID-19 restrictions.
Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, slowing growth, fleeing foreign investors, and a property giant ordered to liquidate. China's economy has faced a slew of setbacks, but is it in serious trouble? Also this week, from tech companies to media, American firms have slashed thousands of jobs since the start of the year. Other workers fear they now could be at risk. Plus, so-called polyemployment is on the rise. We'll take a look at why employees are increasingly working more than one job.
Now, China was expected to experience a rip-roaring recovery after it lifted strict COVID-19 restrictions, but almost a year after the measures ended, China's economy seems to be stumbling. And it's only a matter of time before the USA joins them. Why? Let's jog our memories. Past recessions usually started with some extreme optimism. The tulip seller believes prices will be higher next year. The stockbroker believes the share prices will double next year. Your landlord thinks his house will be double the price next year. And after the pandemic-induced recession of 2020, the world began the year on a high.
Hello, I'm Donna Friesen. The start of a new year always brings hope of new beginnings and fresh starts.
But global growth remains solid, led by a strong recovery in the United States.
It was roses and sunshines. The Fed rates were lowered from 2.25% in 2019 to 0.25% in May 2022. And with lower rates, of course, comes cheap loans. Now, USA credit card debt is one of the highest in the world at $1.13 trillion in 2023. House prices have been increasing exponentially. The SP 500 has grown from 3,756.07 points on December 31st, 2020 to highs of 5,181.65 points in March 2024. Where do you think all this money came from?
To ensure that working Americans impacted by the virus can stay home without fear of financial hardship, I will soon be taking emergency action, which is unprecedented, to provide financial relief.
$2 trillion in relief, though, is the package that they came up with.
They basically printed money, and all this money pumped into the economy must find an exit. In comes the Fed, ready to collect its dues. Time to return the money to its rightful owner. Are we in a recession? The short answer is yes. But is it being suppressed? Look at this.
While higher interest rates, slower growth, and softer labor market conditions will bring down inflation, they will also bring some pain to households and businesses.
He didn't mince any words. He was quite blunt in the fact that the Fed was willing to take a recession if that's what it took to derail inflation.
I mean, it's been amazing how resilient, in a way, the consumer has been to this inflationary shock.
The consumer is still very strong. They're just spending differently.
People are still spending, and that has been important to the economy.
But up to what point? We're spending because we need to survive, not because we have money, but even those savings will run out. In fact, the personal savings rate in the United States has reduced to 3.8%, which is the lowest it has ever been for the past 10 years. And they're still trying to hide the fact that we're in a recession. The bubble is ripe and is ready to be pumped. But who will ask the hard question?